Hi folks, today is the 3rd of October 2015 and Christopher Monckton starts off in this episode speaking about Agenda 2030, the latest news that's come out of the United Nations in New York City this week. He speaks about the origins of the environmentalist movement. He compares what we are witnessing today as with the environment movement to Nazi Germany. He speaks about the media, and in particular the left, and the influence that they have on the masses. He speaks about the word sustainability, and its origins of this particular word and how it's very freely used to mean whatever you want it to make it mean. He speaks about the free market and the nemesis of the New World Order, which is democracy. Please continue to subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's lots happening in the background here. We're trying to, time permitting, of course, update you with everything. I look forward to the comments below the video in the discussion area so we can have a discussion. That's what it's all about. And as Christopher said, if you don't agree with what he says, do your own research, and perhaps together we could all come together and at least understand what's going on. It's an interesting world at the moment, and so without further ado, please watch the video and comment, and we'll see you again soon. Over and out.
Agenda 2030 is the revamped Agenda 21, a program at the United Nations whose main purpose is to transfer power and wealth to the United Nations from national governments. And the way the UN set this up is by working directly with local and regional rather than with national authorities. Because the national authorities might spot that the UN was building its own empire at their expense. And so by going to local authorities and saying to them, this is the big UN, you can be part of a big UN program, it makes the local authorities feel more important. And so that was the sell, if you like. And so a lot of particularly left-wing local authorities bought into Agenda 21 and have been going around rezoning and regulating and effectively nationalizing all real property, all land, all houses, all estates. The whole thing is effectively nationalization without paying for it by the back door via regulation, using the environment as an excuse. And this, of course, goes right back to Nazi Germany, which was the first government in the world to use environmentalism as a means of regulation. And they had an enormous environmentalist program run by the Nazi Party to effectively, again, to give the Nazi Party control over every detail of people's lives and over every piece of real property. Even if they didn't actually own it, they controlled it as though they did own it via endless environmental regulations. And this idea was copied, of course, first of all in the Soviet Union under Stalin in a very big way. And then from there, the left became the environmental movement. They really set it up. The Nazis were, of course, left-wing. They were National Socialists. The communists are communist socialists. Now we have environmentalist socialists. This is a political movement using the environment, just as the original Nazis did, as a means of exercising political control over people who would otherwise disagree with them. And to do so in a kind of moralizing way, which makes it sound as though they have a good reason for the various encroachments on liberty, which are happening now on a daily basis all around the world. Now, in fact, very little of this environmental regulation does the environment any good at all. If you look at the enormous environmental destruction in Germany under the Nazis perpetrated by the state, with the huge industrialization that went on, and no thought for the environment when that was happening, and the same in spades in Russia, and you can see it today in communist China, the same thing. They'll talk about the environment, they'll pass environmental regulations to control the people, but they won't pay any attention. And it's the same with the environmentalist movement. If you look at, for instance, what they're advocating here in Scotland, which is endless windmills everywhere, this has been environmentally destructive of my beloved Highlands in a way which no amount of industry could ever have done. You can now see these wretched engines of destruction from 60% of the Scottish landmass. In fact, now from 2/3 of the Scottish landmass, you can see these windmills. We have lost the visual beauty that once was Scotland. That's gone because these windmills get in the way. And the environmental destruction is not confined to just the visual impact either. All our rare big game birds like the golden eagles and the ospreys and the hen harriers and the ptarmigans and the blackcocks, all these great birds, which some of which exist really only in Scotland in decent populations, these are actually being wiped out. And if you talk to the Royal Society for the Prevention of Birds, or you talk to Scottish National Heritage, whose job is to protect the birds, they will give you this, their eyes glaze over, and they give you this speech that climate change is the biggest threat to the planet ever, and therefore it doesn't matter if we kill all the birds, we have to save the planet. And this is how mad this environmentalist movement is. They've lost all touch with reality. It's all about money, power, and glory. It's nothing to do with the environment. They hate the environment. They want to destroy the environment as long as they get rich doing it. And so one should understand that the environmentalist movement, which is now an enemy of humanity and an enemy, above all, of the environment, has been co-opted by the world government wannabes at the UN, first via Agenda 21 and now via Agenda 2030, which is just maintaining this endless power grab that the UN is involved in, and which people like the Turnbull government in Australia are going to play straight into the UN's hands, because Turnbull wants global government as long as he's part of it. He's a control freak. They all are, these people. And so what can we do about it? And this is really the difficult thing. And the one weapon that we have that they have always found very difficult to deal with is democracy. That's why none of these international bodies are elected. They're terrified of democracy, because they know that once people start working out for themselves that they've been hornswoggled on this environmental stuff, that it's all been overdone and exaggerated for the sake of making a few people rich at the expense of the many, then the people will vote them down and vote them out. So this is why the media's role is so important, and it is one of the reasons why the left have taken very good care to take control of the media, and why when I suggested that there should be a right-of-centre media presence in Australia in a video a couple of years ago, the left eventually found that video, and they were terrified, because they knew that once we can start talking directly to the people in the same way they can, we're going to win all these arguments, because the facts are with us. But the UN at the moment is using this Agenda 2030, the sustainability goals. This word sustainability, let's talk a bit about that. This was invented, or co-opted rather, by Gro Harlem Brundtland, the immensely ugly former Prime Minister of Sweden, who set up a pompous thing called the Brundtland Commission, whose job really, in all but name, was to find a way of making socialism permanent in the form of a world governmental structure. Now, of course, you won't find any of that stated in the paperwork, but that is what they were really trying to do, and that's what the UN has also been trying to do virtually ever since it was founded. And so when the global warming thing came along, the UN captured that at a very early stage. And then likewise, they saw the usefulness of this sustainability thing. Now, what does sustainability mean? It means whatever you choose it to mean. It's one of these portmanteau words that the socialists love to use. That means they can make it so, again, they can make what sounds like a moral case. We have to, it usually starts with, we have to ... or we must. You can always hear these words, must. The left love that, because this is their way of asserting control. And so they say, we must have a sustainable future. Now, the thing is about the various methods of government by which you might achieve a sustainable future, the one that has proven to work best is, of course, free market capitalism. Why is this? Because if a resource begins to become scarce, in a free market, the price automatically goes up to reflect the scarcity. in accordance with an economic law known as the law of supply and demand. And you don't have to tell it to. The great thing about the free market is that the sum of all our decisions, taking into account our knowledge of what is available and what isn't. Why is gold expensive? It isn't expensive because Grow Harlem Brundtland Sustainability Commission said we better make it expensive, otherwise we'll run out. It's expensive because it's scarce, and the free market puts up its price. Now, Brundtland and her ilk and the UN, they hate that because that allows ordinary people to take decisions with their money, and that dictates the future of the world. They don't want that. They want to dictate the future of the world. And so they can't endure the notion of the free market. And so they have had to try to find a way of making the free market look bad. And of course, one of the ways is, as they say, well, the free market is what has caused all these emissions of CO2. This is a market failure. Well, now, of course, this language of market failure, this is communist language. It's language that was picked up in the Stern report on the economics of climate change, for instance. And they talk of market failure because we burnt fossil fuels without realizing that we were pouring all this global warming pollution into the atmosphere. That's the storyline. Well, now, of course, if we didn't know that it was causing a problem, then that's not a market failure. That's just a lack of information. In an imperfect world, we're going to have lack of information. And then when we find things out, we can make adjustments accordingly. As it happens, we now have learnt that if you put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, some warming will result. Not very much, not to worry about. But that, again, because it isn't really a threat, that doesn't suit the agenda of the extremists who want to take control of the world by undemocratic means. And so what they have tried to do is to magnify the global warming scare, and then also to bundle in with it the notion that as the population of the world grows, so natural resources will run out, and then we'll be left with nothing, and unless we have a gigantic regime of government to regulate it all from the centre at the UN. And so that is really what sustainability means. It means big government on a global scale for the first time, so that they can regulate and dictate supplies and demand for natural resources. And this is something, of course, which has been tried. It was tried in Nazi Germany. It was tried in fascist Italy. It was tried in Pol Pot's Cambodia. It was tried in Mao's China. It was tried in Stalin's Russia. It doesn't work. You actually consume more natural resources, you do more damage to the environment if you interfere with the free market than if you allow the free market to regulate things, if you allow us, by our spending decisions, to regulate things. And so the free market and democracy naturally go together because the free market is a very democratic institution. It gives everyone power. And what's more, if you allow it to operate as a truly free market, even though the rich will have more power in that marketplace than the poor will, and get used to it, that's the way life works, at least the government won't have vast amounts of power in the way that it did in Nazi Germany or Stalin's Russia or Pol Pot's Cambodia or Mao's China. These dictators wielding absolute power and absolute control of all wealth, those are the ones we should be really frightened of. And so what is so useful to these would-be dictators, these world government wannabes, is to dress up their naked dash for absolute power and wealth under a guise of moralistic, we must save the planet. We must save the planet from ourselves. We must save you from yourselves at your expense. That's the message. And it's a very alluring one. It's one which, of course, most of the news media will fall straight into because they're largely left-wing. Yeah. They will parrot this because the media have always been left-wing. Why was it that all the nations of Europe were for appeasement of Hitler long after any fool could see that war was inevitable, that he had to be stopped? Because they love dictatorship. And they like being next to power. They like being able to say, I went and interviewed Mr. Hitler. And this is why the media instinctively will always go against democracy. Whatever they say, The media hate democracy. They hate the idea that ordinary people should have their say about anything.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Up until recently, back in 1992, when Agenda 21 came out, it was meant to be, it was labelled as a conspiracy, but in actual fact it wasn't. It was a legal document signed in Rio de Janeiro and all the rest of it. Okay, now this Agenda 2030 that's come out, it's like in your face, like, well, here it is now, and someone described Agenda 2030 as Agenda 21 on steroids. Like, now? How come all of a sudden it's like, here it is, everyone. These are the 17 goals which they've written out, and which I'm going to post on the video, the link there. Now, why all of a sudden it's like, oh well, we don't have to hide. Here it is in your face. Why the big? Why so suddenly? It's like I was like, wow.
They've learned. If you think back to Copenhagen in 2009, when they wanted to get the World Climate Treaty, and they thought they were going to do it. They thought there was no opposition, it was all going to sail through. Now, I got hold of an advance copy. They actually had, where are we now, just at the beginning of October, by the beginning of October in 2009, they had the complete draft Copenhagen Treaty online. You could go and look it up.
Yep.
Now, it was in an obscure place. They didn't advertise it. You could go and look it up. You had to hack through various sub-pages before you found it. But it was there. And Dr. Willie Soon of the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics found this, because he reads everything, poor fellow, and he got in touch with me and said, you have to see this. So I read it with mounting horror, and an hour later, as it happens, I was in Canada at the time. I was due to give a talk to the Petroleum Club of Calgary. So I told them about this treaty, and I said, they're trying to set up a world government. The word government is in the treaty. This is what they're doing. They're going to give it three powers. It'll be the powers of regulation, the power of taxation, and the power of enforcement. And they, of course, not going to use the word enforcement. That would give the game away.
No.
They're calling it facilitation. And that's the UN's word for making people do what they're told. And these are the three powers this new government is going to be given. And there was a journalist there called Kevin Libin, and he was from the National Post, which is a big conservative morning paper in Canada. He came up afterwards. He said, Monckton, I thought better of you than that. World government conspiracy theory. I mean, frankly, don't be silly. I said, look, I have three words for you, Kevin. He said, what's that? I said, read the bloody treaty. He said, that's four words. I said, you deserve the fourth one. He said, you mean there is one? I said, do you really think that 25 of the world's richest men would have me to talk to them if they thought I was just some bullshitter like all the left-wing websites say? Of course they wouldn't. Now go and read it.
Yeah.
So he got in touch and said, I can't find it. Right? It wasn't easy to find, so I sent it to him. And an hour later, he rang up. And he said, why didn't you tell me? I said, well, I rather thought I had. I mean, that was the whole point of my talk. It was to say, world government is coming. This will not be a good thing for businesses big or small. It will be a very good thing for the governing class and hopeless for everybody else. And he said, but it's 10 times worse than anything you said. And I said, well, if I had actually said this is going to be a global communist dictatorship, wielding absolute power without any effort anywhere to consult the people in the form of ballots or elections or votes, would you have believed me? He said, no, I didn't believe you as it was. I said, well, now you know why I toned it down. And even when I turned it down, it sounded extreme. Why? Because it is. And it's not a conspiracy. You've got the draft treaty in front of you. You know that this is what they're up to now. What are you going to do about it? He said, leave it to me. This is going on the front page of the Morning Post when I've checked it out. He spent a week. He couldn't believe it. He simply couldn't bring himself to believe it. He spent a week checking it out. He found it was all true. And he ran a terrific front page piece saying world government is coming and we need to stop it. And it turned onto a full broadsheet page inside which just spelt out all the horrors that he'd found reading through this long, turgid UN draft. And a week later, he was working for the Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, who is one of the he's now at the moment the only Prime Minister in the world who would stand out against against the Paris Treaty, because of course,
we lost Abbott.
Tony Abbott, who would have been the other, has gone. So this was a very interesting moment, this Copenhagen Treaty, because it showed what they were up to. It showed the naked ambition for world governing power. It's there in print. You can still download it. They actually altered one of the two passages afterwards to try to conceal and soften the effect, but they themselves forgot there was another passage which they forgot to alter, and that's still there. You can actually read it, and you can see that they were intending to establish a global government. And that remains, and always has remained, their intention. The fact that they had a setback at Copenhagen doesn't mean they've ever given up. At Cancun, the very following year, they established 1,000 new bureaucracies at supranational and global level to be the sinews of this new global government. And these bureaucracies are already being paid for. Many of them are now in operation, quietly, invisibly. And this is the point. They learnt from the Copenhagen experience that if you put the treaty up in advance, so the likes of me might see it and might make speeches on YouTube that get 3 million hits saying, look what's coming, this will make it much harder for them to get their way. So this time, both with Agenda 2030 and with the Paris Treaty, you don't know what's in it until you've got it. This is a technique that's used over and over again by the left. They don't like democracy. As I said before, they hate democracy. So when Obama wanted to get Obamacare through the House, he said you can find out what's in the bill after you've voted for it.
And signed it.
Now, on any view, that's not democracy. That is dictatorship, red in tooth and claw. But they don't care.
No,
they don't care. So democracy gets in their way.
And can I just ask a question?
Free market gets in their way.
What happened in New York this week? What's the difference between what they all signed off, and Julie Bishop was there and on behalf of the Australian government, and what's the difference between that signing and what's going to happen in Paris?
Very little. They're effectively saying the same thing.
Okay.
What they're saying is we're going to sign up to this global government. And the environment is the excuse. That's the label we'll put on it, so that nobody quite sees what it's really all about.
And it's interesting that Malcolm Turnbull came in on the 4th of September, and exactly 20 days on the 24th, Julie Bishop was in the UN signing away.
That's right. I mean, this was very carefully plotted. This was gamed and thought through. And I mean, as you know, last year, I said this was going to happen. I said, you've got to guard Tony Abbott's back because they will try this. And it will be the Turnbull faction that will do it. I mean, I was very explicit in the speech I gave in Brisbane saying this is going to be done because they really don't want any Prime Minister standing up and saying, I was elected to oppose this, which of course he was. So there's no doubt that this is now what the French would call a trahison d'éclair, a betrayal by the ruling class on a global scale for the first time. These people now have complete contempt for ordinary people. They've got the media where they want them. They know that whatever they say they'll get away with without any real questioning. And they are going to get their global government, I think. And so what do we do to stop them? Well, increasingly, they are going to find that interfering with the free market doesn't work. It didn't work under Nazism, it didn't work under communism, it didn't work under Pol Pot, it didn't work under any of the various regimes, including the various Arab regimes now that have tried running their systems without democracy. It doesn't work. And so, within this hideous new government, there are the seeds of its own self-destruction. We will not be able to destroy it. We will be disempowered to the extent that this global government is empowered. We will be impoverished to the extent that this global government is enriched by its preemptive power of taxation. And we will also have to live to some extent and for a time under a regime of fear, because what I am doing now, talking to you freely about what they're trying to do, this will not be permitted in future. And so this will be one of the last times you will ever hear anyone calling this out for what it is. And you will not hear this being put to you in extremist tones. I'm just laying it out exactly as it is, giving you chapter and verse from the various documents. This is what they are going to do. This is their ambition. And everyone who is a good, red-blooded, I want to be a dictator, world government wannabe, is cheering from the sidelines and wondering how he can get a piece of the action. That's what's going on. And that's why they had to get back to your original question. That's why they had to do it in secret. That's why they had to keep this entire document under wraps until they could just foist it on people and say, there you are, this is what you're going to get whether you like it or not. This is the new style of government. This is open communism now. No longer do we make even the pretense of consultation of ordinary people. We simply hand down decrees, diktats, ukases from the centre, and you like it or lump it. And the next thing they'll be doing, and you heard it here first, is they'll be starting to pass laws and persuade nations around the world to pass laws making it a crime to oppose their point of view. So that if I want to argue that maybe we're not going to get so much global warming as they had originally said, and indeed the scientific literature largely agrees with me on this now, that will be something that will in future be illegal to say. And I could go to jail if I said it, so I might as well say it now while they can't get imprisoned before it. But that is where this is going. Now let's not mince words. That's where this is going. They are going to lock people up who disagree with them. Because as they get this global government in place, and as people begin to see how all-powerful and how undemocratic and anti-democratic it is, and how against the interests of ordinary people it is, and how against the interests of the environment it is, that's where they've made a mistake. They have used the environment as their Trojan horse so as to get into a position of power, to storm the walls and establish their global government.
Yeah.
But then the first thing they're going to do is mess up the environment. We've seen this, as I say, in Scotland now with these windmills, which are ruinous for the environment, destroying the bird population, disturbing the deer, frightening everybody, wrecking the landscape. The environmental destruction being wrought in the name of environmentalism is what's going to turn the young people off this. You see, young people are, again, instinctually, much more anti-democratic than one may think. And so they'll at first they'll say, yes, we need a strong global government, weak democratic governments haven't worked. This kind of language, which is what Hitler used and Stalin used, this kind of language is very appealing to young people. It always has been and it always will be. But they've made the mistake of recruiting young people to their cause by saying that this is going to save the environment that their parents had trashed and put it back to a pristine planet with lots of trees and so forth. That's the storyline. The point is, though, that every dictatorship there has ever been has been damaging to the environment and has only used environmentalism as an excuse or a pretext to keep people under its control, and it doesn't have any real interest in preserving the environment. That is exactly the same with this new governing class that we're going to see now. They will hate the environment just as much as the Greens in Scotland did. Let's destroy the countryside. Let's put these windmills everywhere. Let's wreck it. Let's trash it. We're all townies anyway. We hate those people who have the pretty countryside. Why should they have the advantage? Let's take it from them. And this hatred by the townspeople of people who have the privilege of living in the country, this is something which this governing class is going to have. It's going to have this hatred of the countryside, this hatred of the environment, while at the same time paradoxically using the environment as an excuse to justify its existence as a global government. And that's where this entire movement has within it the seeds of its own destruction, because the young people are eventually going to realise, hang on a moment, we thought we'd go walking around Ben Nevis and we find it's destroyed by windmills. We thought we'd go walking in the highlands around Rannoch and destroyed by windmills. This is not environmentalism. And they'll begin to realise one by one, hang on a moment, this is not saving the environment, this movement, it's trashing the environment. And then they'll work out, well, why are they doing that? They've told us we should love the environment. Why are they trashing it? And when they think that through, they say, well, of course, they're trashing it because they're making money out of trashing it, and they're getting powerful by trashing it while pretending that they are there to defend the environment. Now, young people are quite bright. They'll work that out. They'll have to see it first. They won't believe it till they've seen it. And that's why every so often you actually have to allow this type of thing to happen. You have to allow a global government, I think, now to come about. I don't want it to. And if I could, I'd stop it. But I think it's now going to have to happen, because only then will people realise how terrible a thing it is.
Yeah.
And so then what do we do about it? Well, we have to give, again, particularly the young people, a chance to get themselves out of the mess that our generation, at least not our generation, but the people in our generation who have subscribed to this world government mentality, have put them in. And I was walking through Edinburgh the other day and stopped in the street by someone who said, oh, I know you. You're that Lord Monckton, aren't you? And I said yes, and we went off for a drink. Then he missed his train, so he came and slept on my sofa for the night. And he said, look, he said, I'm fascinated because at first I was all in favour of this environmental movement and you know, the pro-European movement, all these things. He said, then I started seeing speeches by you. He said, you were the first to open my eyes to the fact that yes, Europe has given major contributions to the world, and yes, the environment is worthy of preservation, but that the movements to push these two agendas, the European Union agenda and the environmentalist agenda, are essentially nothing to do with how wonderful Europe is or how wonderful the environment is. They are movements simply to establish centralized, regional and now global power. And he said, it wasn't until I saw your speeches that I understood. He said, the moment I had it pointed out to me, the scales fell from my eyes. He said, I could see at once what was happening, and then I could read all the stories with a completely fresh eye. And I could work out for myself, because you always say in your speeches, don't believe a word I say, go and check it. So I could check out. They were making various environmental claims about global warming. I began checking them out. And you were quite right. They kind of don't quite stack up. There really isn't a clear case for the trillions they're spending on this. He said, you know, it's only when you told me where to look that I began going and checking and finding, hey, this doesn't... He wrote to me afterwards, he said all this. And so what we have to keep doing, while we are still free to do so, is quietly giving people the accurate information, which is what the lordmonckton.com website will be all about. It's what the YouTube channel we're setting up is all about. It's just to make sure that the material which tells you where to look is available. And unlike the bossy material you'll get from the dictators, I'm democratic. On my website, it will say, I am one voice among many. Yeah. You do not have to believe every word I say. I think it's right. I've done my best to check it insofar as, with my limited understanding, I can understand these things. I think I've got it right, but I may not be right. So go and check it. But at least you have the other side of the story, so that you don't end up just thinking that there is no such thing as another side of the story. We can only have one view. Yeah. Because that's another very dangerous strand in this increasing movement towards global dictatorship, which is now gathering rapid momentum. And that is, they're saying that only one point of view is permissible. Now, I was brought up in the days when Britain was still a democracy. And it was beaten into us, I mean literally beaten into me, that you had to allow everybody their point of view. Even if their point of view was plainly barking mad, you had to allow them to have that point of view. And let everybody be free to state their point of view, so that then, by the free market in ideas, by everybody arguing publicly, and that's why the press had a sacred duty, I was taught, to give both sides of the argument, then democracy could function, because people would be well informed, they would hear there were various arguments, they could weigh up, and if they thought one set of arguments was completely kooky, they could dismiss it, but at least it would still get a hearing.
Yeah.
And that is now changing. They're now saying it is intolerable that Monckton and people like him should be allowed to go around saying that global warming isn't the problem, that we, the governing class, need it to be so that we can set up our global government. We cannot have him saying these things. And so you will have seen just recently a couple of dozen professors in the United States got together and wrote to Mr. Obama saying you must arrest the likes of Monckton, you must arrest these people and prosecute them under the Racketeer Influenced Corrupt Organizations statute in the United States for daring to suggest that there might not be anything like as bad a climate problem caused by man as we have been telling them there is. And it turned out that the lead author of this letter demanding our trial and imprisonment was a man who has received millions from taxpayers to promote the environmentalist, or as we now know it really is, global governmentalist agenda. And so he was caught out. He's now facing a congressional investigation himself, because democracy is just beginning to bite back. The election of Tony Abbott was one such sign. Of course, that was stamped on by the powers of global dictatorship, the amount of money and power, and of course the media controlling interests that did for Tony Abbott, shows how strong these people are, but it also shows their weakness. It also shows they know that if the people left to themselves were allowed to hear both sides of the argument properly, they would vote against every line of this nonsense. And so what I think now has to happen, and you're going to have to help me think of how we make it happen, is there needs to be a global political party for the first time, which will be a freedom party, a party of freedom, democracy, free speech, and these will be the core central principles, so that never again will somebody get away with saying we must shut down discussion on a particular point of view because the government has decided only one point of view is permissible. We will fight against any such matter. Let there be free speech. And I think that we're going to have to do this. It's going to have to be organised. It's going to have to be funded. God knows how. I'm as poor as a church mouse, but no doubt there'll be people who are willing to help. And we need to make sure that there is a voice for all the peoples in the world who do not live under democracy, and soon we will all not live under democracy, so that once again we restore democracy and the free market and freedom of speech and debate to the heart of human affairs.
Yeah.
That's where we're going to have to go in response to this initiative by this global governing class to take absolute power.
Wow. Okay, I think we'll leave it there for now. That was there's a lot to think there, and I appreciate your time, and no doubt we'll have another interview soon. And thank you so much, Christopher, for your time.
A real pleasure. And while you're there, I don't know whether your computer can pick this up.
Yeah.
But can you hear that?
Yeah. Yes, I can.
Let that be our theme tune then. It's a nice cheerful one. I wrote it the other day.
That's true. You have a way with the ivory piano, and I have proof of that. So I might actually put that on the YouTube as well. and another side of Lord Monckton that not a lot of people know about, and I've got some footage of you here at my place. So I might just put that in, Christopher. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Okay, let this just play out. It's only another few bars.
Okay.
Enjoy listening.
Well, I tell you what, you haven't lost your sense of humour in the midst of all this doom and gloom. You've, like a true evangelist, you've come out with some good news there. Thank you. Amen.
There you go.
Lovely, lovely. Oh, good stuff. Thank you, Christopher. See you later, my friend. We'll talk soon again.
All the best.
Bye-bye.